Hey True Crime Besties, welcome back to an all-new episode. So today we are diving into a case that is not only heartbreaking, but it is also infuriating on every single level, and I mean that. Because this is the story of Betsy Faria, a woman who was brutally murdered in her own home in Missouri back in 2011. And what makes this case so insane is that her husband, Russ, was wrongfully convicted of her murder and spent over 3 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Meanwhile, the real killer, Betsy's so-called best friend, Pam Hupp, walked free for years. And let me just tell you, the more you learn about this case, the more your blood is going to boil because the incompetence, the lies, the corruption, it is truly unbelievable. So let's get into it. Alright, so Betsy Faria was born in 1969, and by all accounts, she was just this really vibrant, fun-loving woman. She had this huge smile, this big heart, and she was the type of person who would just light up any room that she walked into. She loved being social, she loved making people laugh, and actually, one of the things that she was known for was being a DJ. She would DJ at parties and events, and she would get everybody up and dancing. Like she was the life of the party. That was Betsy. Now, Betsy had 2 daughters from a previous relationship, Leah and Mariah, and in the late 90s, she met this guy named Russ Faria. They actually met at a gas station where Russ was a customer and Betsy was the one who asked him out first. They hit it off immediately. They bonded over their shared interests, and Russ actually ended up helping Betsy with her DJ business. He had a background in computers, so he helped her create this computerized playlist system. And back then, that was pretty cutting edge. So they combined their skills, got married in 2000, and Russ helped raise Betsy's 2 daughters. And by all accounts, they had a pretty good life together. But then, in January 2010, Betsy got some devastating news. She was diagnosed with breast cancer. Now, at first, it looked like she was going to beat it. She went through treatment, things seemed to be going well. And in November of 2011, Betsy and Russ actually went on what they called a celebration of life cruise with their friends and family. They swam with dolphins. They just really tried to make the most of every moment because Betsy wanted to celebrate being alive and being cancer-free. But then, right before that cruise, they got more bad news. The cancer had come back, and this time it had spread to her liver. It was terminal. The doctors told her she maybe had 3 to 5 years left at most. So you can imagine how devastating that was for Betsy, for Russ, for her daughters, for everybody. But Betsy, being Betsy, she decided she wasn't going to just give up. She wasn't going to sit around and be sad. She was going to keep living her life, keep fighting, keep being positive. That was just who she was. Now, during this time, Betsy reconnected with an old coworker of hers named Pam Hupp. So Betsy and Pam had worked together at a State Farm office back in the early 2000s. Betsy had actually trained Pam when she first started working there because Pam was new to the insurance business. And they were friendly back then, but they had lost touch over the years. But once Betsy got her cancer diagnosis, Pam reached back out, and they rekindled their friendship. And Pam started offering to drive Betsy to and from her chemotherapy appointments, which, on the surface, seems like a really nice, supportive friend thing to do, right? But here's the thing. According to Russ, Betsy had a lot of other friends who she was way closer to than Pam. Pam was calling Betsy her best friend, but Russ said that wasn't really accurate. Betsy had actual best friends, people she'd known for years, people she confided in. Pam was more of like an acquaintance, who was kind of inserting herself into Betsy's life during this really vulnerable time. And that should have been a red flag, but nobody really thought anything of it at the time. Now, Betsy was worried about what would happen to her daughters financially after she died. She was concerned that they were young, they were teenagers, and she didn't know if they would be responsible with money. She was also worried that Russ might, in her words, piss it away. So she started thinking about how to protect them financially. And apparently, Pam was in her ear a lot during this time, talking to her about life insurance and finances and all of that. And then, on December 23rd, 2011, just 4 days before Betsy was murdered, she did something that, in hindsight, is extremely suspicious. She changed the beneficiary on her $150,000 life insurance policy from her husband Russ to Pam Hupp. Now, Pam claimed that Betsy wanted her to hold the money in a trust for her daughters, so that they wouldn't blow through it all at once. But here's the thing, guys. That never happened. Pam kept every single penny of that money. She never put it in a trust. She never gave it to Betsy's daughters. She just kept it for herself. Which, if that doesn't scream motive, I don't know what does. So now let's talk about December 27th, 2011. This was a Tuesday, and it was just 2 days after Christmas. Betsy had been staying at her mother's house for a few days, and that day she had a chemotherapy appointment. Now, originally, the plan was that Russ was going to pick her up from her mom's house later that evening, after his weekly game night with his friends. But Betsy ended up texting Russ and saying that Pam had offered to drive her home earlier. And Betsy, being tired from the chemo, accepted. So, Pam drove Betsy home that evening, making her the last person to see Betsy alive. And according to prosecutors, this is when Pam carried out her plan. Betsy was weak. She was lethargic from the chemotherapy. She probably just wanted to go home, lay on the couch, and rest. And Pam took advantage of that. According to the evidence, Pam waited until Betsy was on the couch under a blanket, and then she attacked her with a knife. She stabbed Betsy 55 times. 55 times, you guys. That is brutal. That is overkill. That is rage. And here's where it gets even more twisted. Prosecutors say that after Pam murdered Betsy, she tried to stage the scene to make it look like Russ had done it. She allegedly took Betsy's socks, dipped them in her own blood, and spread the blood around the house to make it look like there had been a domestic violence incident. She was trying to frame Russ from the very beginning. So, Russ had been at his weekly game night with his friends. This was something he did every single Tuesday. He had 4 friends who were with him that entire evening. They played games, they hung out. Russ even made stops at a couple of different stores on his way there and on his way home. There were receipts. There were witnesses. There was his cell phone data showing exactly where he was. And when he got home around 9:40 p.m., he walked in the door, called out for Betsy, and then he found her. She was on the living room floor. There was blood everywhere. She had a knife sticking out of her neck. Her wrists were slashed. It was an absolute nightmare scene. And Russ, thinking maybe she had hurt herself, maybe she had tried to take her own life because of the cancer, he immediately called 911. And on that call, you can hear how distraught he is. He's sobbing. He's panicking. The 911 operator who took that call later said that she truly believed he was genuinely shocked and devastated by what he was seeing. But here's where everything starts to go wrong. The police showed up, and almost immediately they zeroed in on Russ as the suspect. And a huge part of that was because of Pam Hupp. Pam started telling the police that Russ and Betsy's marriage was troubled. She said Russ was abusive. She said he was after Betsy's life insurance money. She painted this picture of Russ as this violent, greedy husband who wanted his wife dead. And the police just ate it up. They believed every word she said. Now, never mind the fact that Russ had a rock-solid alibi. He had 4 friends who said he was with them all evening. He had receipts showing he stopped at Arby's and other places. His cell phone records showed he was 20 miles away from the house at the time of the murder. There was no blood on his clothes. There was no blood on his body. I mean, if you stab someone 55 times, you are going to have blood all over you. But Russ had nothing. Yet the police were so convinced that he did it, they just ignored all of that evidence. And Pam's story kept changing. At first, she told police she didn't go inside the house when she dropped Betsy off. Then she said, "Oh, actually, I did go inside just to turn on a light." Then it was, "Oh, actually, I walked all the way to the bedroom with her." Her story kept evolving, but the police didn't seem to care. They also had cell phone data showing that Pam had been in the area of Betsy's house for up to 30 minutes after she claimed she dropped Betsy off and left. 30 minutes. What was she doing there for 30 minutes? But again, the police just ignored it. So, Russ was arrested and charged with Betsy's murder. And in November 2013, he went to trial. And this trial, you guys, was a complete disaster. The prosecutor, a woman named Leah Askey, argued that Russ's 4 friends were all lying for him. She said they were part of some elaborate conspiracy to give him a false alibi. She called it the ultimate role play. She said they were holding onto his cell phone and buying food for him at Arby's to make it look like he was somewhere else. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous when you think about it. You're telling me that 4 people conspired together to help their friend commit murder, and then all of them kept that secret? Come on. But the worst part is that Russ's defense attorney, Joel Schwartz, wasn't allowed to present evidence pointing to Pam Hupp as an alternative suspect. The judge, Christina Mennemeyer, ruled that he couldn't bring up the fact that Pam was now the beneficiary of Betsy's life insurance policy. He couldn't talk about Pam's changing story. He couldn't present cell phone data showing she was at the house longer than she claimed. His hands were tied. And on top of that, there was some really shady stuff going on with the police investigation. One of the investigators, a guy named Michael Merkel, testified that he had used this chemical called Blue Star to test for blood at the crime scene. Blue Star is something that makes blood glow under certain lighting, even if it's been cleaned up. And Merkel testified that he took photos of the house after spraying the Blue Star, but that the photos showed absolutely nothing because the camera malfunctioned. But here's the thing. The camera didn't malfunction. It worked perfectly fine. There were 132 digital images with complete metadata. And those photos actually showed evidence of blood in areas of the house, which contradicted the prosecution's theory. But Merkel lied about it on the stand. He lied to help secure a conviction against Russ. And this is something we now know because he was charged with perjury just this past year in 2025. But back in 2013, the jury didn't know any of this. So, the jury convicted Russ, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Can you even imagine? An innocent man who just lost his wife in the most horrific way possible is now being sent to prison for the rest of his life for a murder he didn't commit. It's sickening. But Joel Schwartz, Russ's attorney, he didn't give up. He knew his client was innocent, and he kept fighting. He filed an appeal, and in 2015, Russ got a second trial. And this time, Schwartz was allowed to present evidence pointing to Pam Hupp. He was allowed to talk about the life insurance policy. He was allowed to talk about her changing story. He was allowed to present cell phone data. And this time, Russ was acquitted. He was found not guilty, and he was finally set free after spending over 3 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Now, you would think that after Russ was acquitted, the police would start looking at Pam Hupp as a suspect, right? I mean, all the evidence pointed to her. But the prosecutor, Leah Askey, she refused to admit she was wrong. She still maintained that Russ was guilty. And Pam Hupp was never charged. She just walked free. But here's where the story takes an even more insane turn. In August 2016, about a year after Russ was acquitted, Pam Hupp shot and killed a man in her home. His name was Louis Gumpenberger. He was a 33-year-old man with a brain injury, and Pam claimed that he had showed up at her house, tried to break in, demanded Russ's money, and threatened to kill her. She said she shot him in self-defense. But investigators were suspicious, and they quickly figured out that this was not a home invasion. This was a setup. Louis Gumpenberger had been lured to Pam's house under false pretenses. A witness came forward and said that a week before Louis was killed, a woman matching Pam's description had approached her, claiming to be a Dateline producer. She said she would pay her $1,000 to reenact a 911 call for a TV show. The woman initially agreed, but then backed out when Pam couldn't show any credentials. And surveillance footage from this woman's home captured Pam's SUV license plates. Investigators believe that Pam tried to recruit this woman first, but when she backed out, Pam found Louis Gumpenberger instead. Louis had a brain injury and was vulnerable. Pam posed as a Dateline producer, told him she would pay him $900 to participate in a reenactment, and lured him to her house. And then she shot him. She shot him 5 times and staged it to look like he was an intruder trying to rob her and hurt her. And the really sick part is that Louis had $900 in crisp $100 bills in his pocket when he was killed. And police found $100 bills in Pam's house, with sequential serial numbers to the ones found on Louis. So, it was clear that she had given him that money as bait. Prosecutors believe that Pam's motive was to frame Russ Faria again. She was trying to make it look like Russ had hired Louis to come after her and kill her. She was trying to redirect suspicion back onto Russ so that people would stop looking at her as the person who killed Betsy. But her plan completely backfired because investigators saw right through it. Pam was arrested and charged with Louis Gumpenberger's murder, and in 2019 she entered what's called an Alford plea, which basically means she didn't admit guilt, but she acknowledged that prosecutors had enough evidence to convict her. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that murder, that case, is what finally prompted Lincoln County prosecuting attorney Mike Wood to reopen Betsy Faria's murder investigation. Mike Wood had just been elected as the new prosecutor, and he was not about to let this go. He ordered a full case review. He had the major case squad look into it, and in July 2021, almost 10 years after Betsy was murdered, Mike Wood finally charged Pam Hupp with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in Betsy's death. According to the charging documents, Pam had tracked Betsy's movements all day on December 27, 2011. She waited until Betsy was weak and lethargic from chemotherapy, drove her home knowing Russ wouldn't be there, and then attacked her while she was resting on the couch. Pam stabbed her 55 times, then staged the scene to make it look like Russ had done it in a fit of rage. Mike Wood is seeking the death penalty against Pam Hupp, and honestly, I don't blame him. He said, and I'm going to quote this, "I do not take lightly the decision to pursue the death penalty, but this case stands alone in its heinousness and depravity, such that it shocks the conscience." And you know what? I agree. Because Pam Hupp didn't just murder Betsy Faria for money. She then framed an innocent man, helped send him to prison, let him sit there for over 3 years, and then, when he was finally acquitted, she killed another innocent person to try to frame him again. She is a monster. Now, Pam's trial for Betsy's murder is scheduled for August 2026. So it's still coming up. She has pleaded not guilty, and she continues to maintain her innocence, which is laughable at this point. The trial was originally going to be held in Lincoln County, but they changed the venue to Greene County, which is about 4 hours away because it's such a high-profile case. They want to make sure Pam gets a fair trial with an impartial jury, and honestly, good. I want her to have a fair trial. I want everything to be done right, so there are no appeals, no do-overs. I want her convicted fair and square. And speaking of fair trials, there's also been a huge investigation into the police and prosecutors who handled the original case against Russ. Remember that investigator, Michael Merkel, who lied on the stand about the crime scene photos? He was charged with 2 counts of perjury in 2025. And there's also been allegations that the original prosecutor, Leah Askey, was in a relationship with one of the investigators on the case, which is a massive conflict of interest. 2 members of the jury from Russ's first trial came forward and said they were never told about that relationship. That information was withheld from them. Leah Askey has denied any wrongdoing. She says her conduct was above board, and she says she never considered Pam as a suspect because she didn't think Pam was physically capable of inflicting 55 stab wounds. Which I'm sorry, but that is such a weak excuse. Betsy was weak from chemotherapy. She was under a blanket. She was caught off guard. Pam absolutely could have done it, and all the evidence pointed to her. But Leah Askey was so convinced that Russ was guilty, she just ignored everything else. As for Russ, he eventually sued Lincoln County for his wrongful conviction, and in 2020, he was awarded $2 million in a settlement. And honestly, no amount of money can give him back those 3 years he lost. No amount of money can undo the trauma of being accused of murdering the woman he loved. But at least it's something. And Russ has moved on with his life. He's remarried now. And get this, he's actually married to Carol, the woman that Pam Hupp tried to recruit before she found Louis Gumpenberger. So Pam tried to use Carol in her scheme. Carol backed out, and then she and Russ ended up together. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's wild. Betsy's daughters, Leah and Mariah, they were teenagers when their mom was killed, and they not only lost their mother in the most horrific way possible, but they also basically lost their stepdad because he was sent to prison. They've had to deal with so much trauma, and on top of that, they never got the life insurance money that was supposed to go to them. Pam kept it all. But despite everything, Leah and Mariah are doing okay now. They're strong, they have families of their own, and they said that they try to carry on their mom's positive outlook on life. Betsy wouldn't want them to be sad and bitter forever. She'd want them to keep living, keep being happy, and that's what they're trying to do. So that is the story of Betsy Faria, a woman who was murdered by someone she thought was her friend, a woman whose husband was wrongfully convicted and spent over 3 years in prison, a case that exposed massive corruption and incompetence in the criminal justice system, and a case that is finally getting some justice. Pam Hupp is currently sitting in prison serving a life sentence for killing Louis Gumpenberger, and in 2026, she'll stand trial for Betsy's murder. And I really hope they get it right this time. I hope the jury sees through her lies, I hope they convict her, and I hope Betsy's family finally gets the closure they deserve. This case is just one of those that makes you so angry because it didn't have to go this way. If the police had just done their jobs properly in the first place, if they had looked at all the evidence instead of just tunnel visioning on Russ, if they hadn't lied and fabricated evidence, Russ never would have been convicted. Pam would have been arrested right away, and Louis Gumpenberger would still be alive today. But instead, incompetence and corruption led to years of injustice, and that is unacceptable. All right, true crime besties, that's what I've got for you today. Let me know what you think about this case. Do you think Pam Hupp will be convicted in 2026? Do you think justice will finally be served? And what do you think should happen to the investigators and prosecutors who helped wrongfully convict Russ? Let me know in the comments or leave me a review. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any new episodes. And until the next one, be nice, don't kill people, and definitely don't frame innocent people for murders they didn't commit. Bye, guys.